Welcome back to another episode of the Braun Performance and Rehab Podcast, powered by ISOFIT and Oro Muscles. ISOFIT is my go-to for all things isometric strength training, and Oro Muscles is my go-to for an actionable muscle wearable that gives me real-time insights and biofeedback into what the athletes I work with are doing. Today, I'm joined by John Bloom to discuss a variety of different soft skill considerations for the sports performance professional, whether it be the importance of communication and collaboration or what you can learn from other coaches. And I don't just mean other strength coaches, but other skill coaches and rehab clinicians and so much more. This is a really great conversation about how to find success in the space by doing things that most people might not even think of. So really appreciate John's time and love the book that he wrote, Strength in Numbers. Highly recommend you check that out if you haven't already. Enjoy. John, welcome to the podcast, man. I really appreciate your time. For people who aren't familiar with you and all the work that you're doing in the sports performance space, would you mind filling them in a little bit about who you are and all that you're doing?
Yeah, man, I appreciate you having me on. Right now, so I'm in the Dallas area, running my own business called Elevated Athlete Development, and I started that in May. So I left the collegiate coaching scene as a strength coach there. Most recently at Oral Roberts as the director there, but decided to kind of move back where I grew up in Dallas, start their own business. Where I'm training athletes, predominantly basketball athletes, was kind of what I worked with for a while in college. So that's my main. Not that I'm just stuck just to basketball. I train some other athletes, but that's just kind of the way it's worked out of who's kind of come into the business so far. But then also with the business, wanting to get also into doing other aspects with working with coaches too. So along with training the athletes, I'm also doing different stuff with some education with when I first started back in the summer, kind of running a kind of course with a small group, which was both basketball coaches and strength coaches kind of together, which was really cool. And then kind of carrying on some of that with kind of a little community we have of different Zoom calls and bringing coaches together. So really like that's, a big part of the business is helping athletes still, but also getting to try and go and work with more coaches now.
Yeah, and when you say coaches, it sounds like that's a very broad term for you. Some people say, yeah, I want to work with coaches, but only strength coaches. Or, hey, I'm
Hmm.
going to do coaching education, but it's only going to be for skill coaches. When
Yeah.
in reality, you're kind of saying, like, hey, let's just bring everyone to the table and let's put everyone on the same page. And I don't see enough of that, in my opinion, in today's day and
Yeah.
age, right? Like, I think the more that everyone is on the same page in this cohesive manner of working in the best interest for the athlete, the better that athlete is going to do.
For sure.
Plain and simple, like I've seen too many instances where, skill coaches' goals and intentions don't align with strength coaches' goals and intentions, and the athlete ends up doing a lot of work for very minimal gain. And I think the more everything can kind of become aligned that way, the better that athlete is going to be.
Yeah, no, that's something like I'm super passionate about. And like for me, like as much as I can decrease that delineation, I think is so valuable. I think we talked about it before a little bit, but like, especially when I was working in college, with college basketball, like, my best friends are going to be the director of player development, the assistants running all the individual skill stuff, and like how closely can we align that and the conversations I'm having with the head coach of how we're aligning practice throughout the week and just in our daily schedule and just everything together. And I just think that's so huge. And like you're saying, I think it's not focused on or talked about enough because I think like when I think about my impact as a strength coach, like if I just impact the weight room within a team setting, like my impact is not going to go near as far as I'm trying to impact the program. And that's what I've seen with like some of the best, like Darby Rich, who's the strength coach at Texas for men's basketball. That's one of my mentors. Like he is so valuable to programs because of the value he provides to the staff and the program as a whole. And I think the more we can cut that down is so huge. And even just learning like the perspectives of the other people, learning more like that program we did with the strength coaches and basketball coaches. Like one of the feedback I got a lot was like, okay, seeing the feedback and opinions and perspectives of those people in other roles was so valuable to then bring back to their own staff in the conversations they have with that staff and learning to kind of see how maybe these same topics or perspectives of different things, like how kind of different roles view those. And it does have we do have a different lens that we see these things through. So kind of being able to understand those lens and then incorporate that and bring that together with how you're operating. I think is just really critical with whatever role you're in.
Completely agree with that. And to your point on seeing things from a different lens or looking at things through a different way, great example of that recently for myself personally. I was talking with a buddy of mine, Johnny or John Fabrizius. He's out in Salt Lake right now, but we were
Yep.
talking about athlete profiling and different things I was looking to do. And he mentioned a way to, assess and gather VO2, like a projected VO2 max in a way that I had never even thought about. And it's like, if I just stay in my own little wheelhouse bubble, PT 101 here, I don't think I ever would have come to the, result or conclusion that he proposed that way. And after I heard him out, I was like, bro, that makes so
Yeah.
much sense. It's going to be way easier. It's actually going to be better for the athlete. It's like, I'd be stupid to not implement it. But if you're not open to having those conversations, those kind of things never occur. And I think in this space that we exist in sports performance, sports rehab, there's never one right or wrong way to do things. There's like a million different ways to get to your end goal and expected outcome that way. It's about what most fits the program and the individuals that you're working with at that specific time. So, sometimes it might be, bench squat deadlift. Other times it might be, landmine everything or kettlebell everything. Like you've got to be able to wear a lot of different hats and have a wide toolbox and know what tool to use when. But if you don't have the conversations with other people and have a more in-depth understanding of what those tools are, what they do, and how they're going to be applied to the people that you're working with day in and day out, then ultimately you're just kind of like throwing stuff against the wall and hoping it sticks that way. And I think the
Hmm.
more clear and cohesive you can be on the programming side and aligning everything together with expected goals and outcomes, the more effective you're going to be. But also, like, the more you're going to learn from it, right? Like, I think there's a lot of people that I've seen that they'll program something and then a week later they'll change it, or 2 weeks later they'll change it, or they'll program something and they test something and it doesn't improve as much as they want to, so they completely scrap the whole thing, start over. And it's like, how do we learn what we're doing, if it's effective or not, if we're not actually like kind of like auditing ourselves or almost looking at everything we do as almost like its own individual case study that way. And part of that process is getting other expert opinions and feedback and reviewing that. And sometimes those are, again, people who are outside of our wheelhouse, but they give us that new worldly view to look at things. And that new worldly view leads us to, better results, better outcomes for our athletes.
I think that point you bring up, but kind of like feedback is really big. Where I think something like most of us within that work in athletics, like we were athletes, right? We all had coaches growing up, and then kind of once we became, the ones that, we finished our career and now we're working athletics, like, okay, we might have had some form of mentorship at some point, but now we're kind of on our own and we don't really have any formal aspect of coaching or feedback sometimes. And maybe there's different stuff with the people you work with that give you feedback. But I think being intentional and seeking feedback and like you're saying, feedback from different realms and perspectives is huge. Like, if, with whatever staff you were going, for me, like if it's with the basketball staff, okay, going to the assistants and then asking for feedback on the stuff I'm doing from their perspective, not from the strength coach perspective, but like their perspective or the head coach and getting that feedback and finding ways to even systematize that. I even kind of think about it sometimes on like a systematizing like, okay, like personal feedback from myself, how I'm evaluating myself, but then also like feedback from the coaching staff and maybe even feedback from the athletes and kind of systematizing how and when I'm getting kind of those three different areas. I think it's really big to actually have a process for that rather than kind of like you're saying something like, we're gonna throw this in, take this out, like maybe it's working, maybe it's not, but not really like have any real way to evaluate what we're doing and kind of just hoping things stick and work.
Yeah, definitely. What's kind of been your own process of developing that framework for how you operate as a performance coach? And then how do all these different opinions, right? Like obviously you wrote the book recently and you had the
Hmm.
opportunity to chat with over 100 individuals in sports
Hmm.
performance, head coaches, strength coaches, all that way. So you're hit with a lot of new information all at once. And this is
Hmm.
something I see really common with young clinicians, PT, strength coach, whatever that way, right? They go out, they take this new course, exposed to a whole new way of thinking, and then they completely abandon everything they used to do and go all in on that. Hey,
Yeah.
I'm all in on FMS now. Now I'm all in on FRC. Now I'm all in on RPR. Not to say those things are not great. They're awesome, but I see a lot of people just kind of hopping from one thing to the next, one school of thought to the next when they're exposed to that new line of thinking. And I think it's more about having a framework existing and then understanding how these new great things integrate into that. So, what's kind of been your own
Hmm.
personal process for that?
Yeah, I think like you're saying, it's like especially earlier in my career, like you're saying, it's like you're trying to learn everything. Like everything's like the next kind of like secret or like, the thing that's gonna solve everything. You're like jumping trying to learn everything. And I think for me it's like I've realized the points like you have to decrease the input of what I'm bringing in and sometimes increase like output. And for that now it's like okay, like I'll be specific about what I'm trying to learn or like what I'm allowing myself to kind of get into instead of jumping all over the place. And then okay, like from that, how can I keep, the 90% or whatever of what I'm doing is going to stay consistent based off the principles I have, and then how can I kind of keep tweaking like the last 10%? And like you're saying, like, if we change everything, you can't really tell what works. But if we kind of keep our principles overall and our systems we have, and then we make those small tweaks and then examine over a period of time, like, okay, is this helping? Is it not? And just kind of keep the base, and then have those tweaks. We can kind of see what's helping or not, and what we want to take from those new things we're learning. And then, kind of with that, like we're talking about all that information coming in, I've even been thinking about it now lately. It's like even like having periods of greater input versus greater output, where like, right, for you mentioned the book, like for that, right, that's about output. That's about like creating and building this book. And especially towards the latter months of like finishing that project, it's like okay, I'm cutting off input like that's distracting me from finishing and creating this project, right, and creating this output. And then now, right, I finished that, and now, a couple weeks after that's now okay, like I want to have, kind of a little shift gears a little bit, and now I'm trying to like I am kind of trying dipping my toes in a bunch of different areas, like learning kind of in a way of like a break or like undulation of kind of my, where my time is going right now, where I just had this huge amount of intensity of output to finish that thing. And now I'm kind of taking a break from that, really kind of a mental reset in a way, and trying to learn different things and kind of dip my toes into that. And then, after some break, I think, shifting back into output. And I think the output's really big. What I've learned from myself is even if it's like I did this a couple of times when I was, working really early in my career. It's like I'm not assigned this or anything, but I'm gonna do some presentation over this topic and give it to the rest of the staff, like just because I want to have to conceptualize and systematize the ideas I'm learning and like actually like, put ideas together what I'm learning, because that's like when I really learn is when I have to teach it and like put it together, and how it actually work in whatever way I'm trying to make it work and do that. But then I think that focuses your intentions and makes you not be able to jump all over the place, and makes you actually take the information you're learning and put it into some form of practice that's going to actually become valuable rather than kind of jumping all over the place. So, yeah, that's kind of something I've been playing around with, is kind of thinking about that switching though between input and output, and kind of when I want to focus on each a little bit more.
First off, I like that 90-10 kind of split that you mentioned earlier about how,
Yeah,
hey, 10% of the time we're going to try new things. And we're going to, see if we can kind of crack the code here, right? It's like I
yeah,
built a model. Now I'm going to go out and try and smash and break that model and find a better way to make it work every single day. And I
yeah.
think that, that 10% amount, 5-10%, that's enough where it's like, hey, look, you still keep the main thing. However, you're still able to like dabble and experiment with different things or new things. And I think keeping that kind of coach curiosity up high that way is always a good
Hmm.
thing that way. You also brought up the concept of inputs and outputs that way. And I think understanding those is really, really crucial. But it's also not just, hey, looking for the good inputs and the good outputs. It's also learning from those that maybe don't align that way. I think everyone's always looking for, the holy grail that way or the golden compass to point them in the right direction, when in reality, sometimes it's just learning what way not to go instead of what way to go that gets you what you're looking for that way. So to give you an example, right, like I might have a conversation with a clinician and I might be looking for exactly what to do for a certain patient that I'm working with, when in reality, they might tell me a story about a time that they worked with someone, what they did, and it didn't work well. And then I can kind of take that input of what didn't work and kind of reflect on it. Hey, why might that not have worked? What elements of that might actually work for the person in front of me versus what things, hey, maybe I don't want to go down those roads. And I think that understanding that, again, sometimes the things that we're looking for are not going to be presented to us in the way that we think they are. So I think kind of looking through things and kind of reading through the context a little bit. I think that the presentation element that you brought up feeds into that perfectly as well, right? Like if you can teach information to other people, you probably understand it fairly well. Assuming you're teaching, accurate, solid information. And I find a lot of times when people are presenting something live, even if it's just a small group, like their name is kind of on the line. Their name is attached to it, their reputation is attached to it. So it tends to mean quite a bit to them. So I've noticed that people will have a tendency to prepare more for something like that, for a live presentation, than they
Hmm.
would like if they're recording it, right? Like if I'm going to jump on a Zoom later and record a 20-minute presentation and stick that online, well, if it doesn't go well, I can always redo it. If it doesn't go well live, I have no shot to redo it. It's all or nothing in that moment that way. And also, you kind of have this expectation people are going to ask you questions and you have to kind of answer them on the spot. And if you don't know, hey, that's okay. But also, like, it's nice to know and think ahead of time on those things. So I think that
Hmm.
having that, kind of repertoire of building live presentations over time and continuing to do that really helps you continue to kind of redefine and hone your skills that way, right? Like, I don't think we
For
should
sure.
ever stop learning. And I think it kind of takes that like assignment element from school that, a lot of people need. A lot of people need a deadline. They need a timeline attached to things in order to get them done. So I think it kind of brings that element into more of like a professional practice that way.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think like you're saying, like having stakes, some form of stakes, even if they're self-imposed, and even like making those public, people talk about like, they're gonna make some better challenge for themselves. And if you put out some stakes on social media, like saying like, hey, I'm gonna do this now, it's like it's out there and like people are gonna hold you accountable. So kind of like that, I think even, it might, be silly just even just saying some form or telling somebody, hey, I'm gonna do this just creates a different level, I think, of commitment to it, like you're saying.
Yeah, completely agree. What's been kind of like your process for keeping yourself accountable for that? Because that's a fairly disciplined thing to do. And obviously, it's pretty easy to just kind of look at it and say, like, hey, look, like this can wait until next week. It doesn't have,
Yeah.
like, I can push it off. What's kind of been your process for staying accountable with that?
I think especially now, like as I'm, running my own business, like I'm my own boss now, like there's no one telling me when I need to do things or whatever. So that is one thing that can be easy to do is like say, oh, like no, I'm gonna just push whatever to the next week, because there's no one, no one putting those stakes on you. I think what I found more and more is how important clarity and clear goals are in any job, but I think especially when you're running your own thing is actually establishing like real timelines and clear goals and like whether it's the bigger clear goal overall, but then how we can break that down into as finite steps as possible and even into like daily clear goals with that bigger target, and really just for me when I have those clear goals it becomes so much easier to just go execute. But then I think if it's like, oh, like I want to do these couple of things and they're more abstract, I want to, if let's rewind, it's like I want to write this book and there's not really any clarity of like, okay, I need to do this and this. It's like, okay, like I might try and work on it today or this week, but it's like there's no real clarity. Like I don't really know what I'm supposed to be executing today. It's really easy to then push that off or not really, spend time on it, but not really actually get anything done on it. So for me, creating like spending the time to actually sit down beforehand and create clear goals, what the priorities are for different tasks and within those tasks has been huge for me.
Yeah, it sounds like you kind of take that concept of the big, large goal and then just break it
Yeah.
down into small, actionable steps. And you do little things every day that eventually accumulate to that larger, big picture kind of thing that way. And I'd imagine
Hmm.
that there's probably almost like not just accountability with yourself, but accountability with other coaches and other individuals worked into that as well, right? Like I see different
Hmm.
people online different times doing like little accountability groups or lift check-ins and that sort of thing. And I freaking love
Yeah.
it because it's
Yeah.
like, the more you kind of like hold each other to the standard that you're trying to set, the more likely it is that everyone gets there and the less likely it is someone falls off the train tracks.
Yeah, for sure. Like, like you talk about the lift check-ins, like I think that's another thing, like for like as everyone like moves out of being an athlete from a team setting, and then now like you're on your own to exercise or train or whatever it is. Similarly, it becomes so easy to say, oh, like, nah, I'm gonna cut this part of the workout or I'm gonna do that tomorrow, whatever. So similar to that, it's like, if you can find someone to work out with or whatever, like it becomes so much easier to actually like work hard and stay consistent with that compared to kind of just being on your own and and having just those conversations in your head where you can really easily talk yourself out of doing what you know you should do. That becomes a lot easier when you actually have somebody there that you're accountable to.
Yeah, and on that point as well, you mentioned before that you kind of had a sporting background before you got into the sports performance space that way. And I think that's common amongst most people in the sports performance or sports rehab space.
Yeah.
There's some background of sports there, whether they played it or they were around it or whatever that way. To your point, sports eventually end for everyone, right? Michael
Yeah.
Jordan eventually retired, for example, right? Like Tom Brady eventually retired, right? Like there's always that end in mind for the actual career element. How did you personally deal with that concept of sports career ending? And then what elements from sport were you able to kind of like transition into the work that you do now?
So for me, I went to college to play football at Abilene Christian. And so, I redshirted my freshman year, and then after the spring of that freshman year, I decided actually to stop playing. So, I was actually the one that made the decision there, and I think part of it was, so I redshirted, and obviously, like during that fall, as a redshirt, we trained like 4 or 5 times a week as redshirts, and I think I found myself in that said like enjoying that, like I enjoyed that aspect so much more than the actual football part at that point. And we got a new staff in the spring, and kind of wanted to see like, okay, like now I'm not fair like playing in the spring and actually getting reps and stuff. We'll see if it changes. And still wasn't like loving that aspect of playing anymore in that part. So that was when I decided to stop playing, and that was a really hard decision, obviously, because my whole life kind of working to get to play in college, and so much of life had been towards working there. So I was hard to step away, but really kind of stepped right into coaching right after that, where I started working with some high schools and different people that summer, and then came back as a sophomore and started working with one of the strength coaches that coached me in my freshman year there, and worked with him, and kind of went right into coaching. And so I guess I never really had to have a break necessarily from sports where I kind of was able to step right back into a team setting in a different manner. But I think I found a lot more passion and purpose once I stepped over and made that transition in that moment. So I don't know, like I don't know that there was, because there wasn't that break point where there was just no sports for me. I don't know if there wasn't any form of like identity crisis or something like that where it's kind of lost that part of me. It was just changed into a little bit of a different role.
Yeah, it's kind of like a very active transition, right? It was
Yeah,
like one thing ends, immediately jump into the next that
yeah,
way.
yeah.
And I just find, like I mentioned before, a lot of individuals have that sporting background, and it's always interesting to me to kind of see what that transition looked like and how they
Hmm.
took things that existed from their sports career and carried them over into coaching that way. Because I find a lot of times, like some of the best coaches are the ones that actually had terrible experiences as an
Yeah.
athlete and they were like, hey, look, like this is our motive. This is our time to make a difference and have an impact that way. And on the flip side, some are just inspired by the positive experiences that they did have, and that makes them want to take that and pass it on to
Hmm.
others. But regardless, I think this space is very much about serving others and lifting others up in the performance
Yeah.
world that way, or through what we can do on the performance side that way. And I think sometimes that is kind of lost or misguided that way. And I think the more that you can emphasize just helping other people, the better off you're going to be, or the more fulfilled you're going to feel in whatever work that you do, even if that is, still just as an athlete that way. Maybe you're still involved playing the sport, so to speak, and your whole goal, maybe you go in thinking it's all about me, we got to put up these numbers, we got to get drafted or whatever that way. And then at the end, that mindset shift occurs, and it's actually more about like, hey, how can I help these other people on my team? How can I lift them up, give them opportunities, that sort of thing, right? Like, I think the
Yeah.
more that we kind of lift up all of those around us, the better everyone does, including ourselves.
I can remember that sophomore year when I was kind of starting in ACU as a strength coach and working with my first mentor, Brandon Decker. I remember I was reading Conscious Coaching by Brett Bartholomew, and it had a lot about kind of reflecting on yourself first. And I was doing a lot of reflecting on like that point of like why did I want to coach, or like what was the purpose of me coaching. And I remember just kind of doing a lot of reflection of my own athletic background and just kind of putting down different timeline, different memories and stuff, and realizing like all of my like, whether it's my friends or coaches, like my most impactful relationships are like all from athletics throughout the growing up of my life. And like you're saying, like I had so many incredible coaches and mentors through my athletic career that part of it for me, it's like the way they impacted my life. Like that's why I want to coach, to then give that impact to other people now as a coach. But there were also some coaches that I looked to in my career. It's like, okay, I recognize like some of the things they did to me or other athletes, of just whether it's certain incidents or just daily things, like of how they made us feel, or the feelings they created. I don't want to be like that. And if I ever feel myself going into that, like, hey, like, I can then remember how people around me or how I felt when people did those things, because I think it can be easy to forget that when you get further away from that. So I've like you're saying, from great coaches in my life, and then other coaches, like taking both good and bad of who I do want to be and who I don't want to be. So then, like the coaches that made that this incredible impact on me as an athlete, we can hopefully then do that on other athletes that I get to coach.
Yeah, it sounds like mentorship, whether formal or informal, played a key role in your own development as a coach that way.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like for example, so my strength coach from sixth through 12th grade, I ended up actually like my senior year there getting to be his assistant and assist with the whole middle school PE all years, my class, and getting to be his assistant the summer before I went to college with the whole summer high school, middle school program. He's one of the closest people alive, and he was a groomsman at my wedding when I got married, about a year and a half ago. And then now like I'm back in Dallas and working out of that high school that he's letting me use now. So he's been an incredible mentor, Alex Pena, and then same thing with other coaches, and then also the mentors now that I've had, like Brandon Decker, Darby Rich, those people in coaching, like all those people like have impacted me so much as a coach, but more so as a person. And I think that's what athletics is about.
To the point that we made earlier, right? Like you can learn all these great things, but if you don't know how to apply them and put the pieces together and actually work with people, you're not
Yeah.
actually going to
Yeah.
get anywhere at all. And it sounds crazy to think like that or say like that, because I know a lot of people are out there saying like it's all about what you know, it's all about putting together the perfect program. But maybe I haven't been in the space long enough, but I've yet to see one program that is perfect for anything and everything that you throw at it that way.
For
And I've
sure.
yet to see someone with all of the answers to all the things, especially with the amount of like just new stuff that's coming out all the time, right? Like anytime you refresh PubMed or Instagram or wherever you get your information from, hey, I don't judge where it's coming from, but it's always new. It's always something new every single
Yeah.
day, every single hour, something's coming out. And it's like it's nearly impossible to stay up to date with the amount of information that's out there. But one thing that's not impossible is staying consistent with how you treat people and being a good, effective coach. And I think that an art of that is individualizing that to the person in front of you, right? Like the way I communicate with one athlete might be different with how I communicate with the next. I think another piece that you'll pick up from mentorship, just like you mentioned, is that art of communication, that art of, connecting with other people, whether that's the athletes, the performance staff and coaching staff or whatever that way. And again, kind of like how we started bringing everyone together with that common goal or end goal in mind that way. And I think the more effective you are at that soft skill that really doesn't get taught in a lot of schools, the more
Hmm.
effective your coaching becomes. And I think, not to say programming doesn't matter, but I think that a program that's 70% perfect, but implemented at 100% and of all those other things will actually get you better results than the 90% perfect program that's implemented, less optimally and with less of that connection element and common goal element, if you will.
No doubt. And as you talk about like that soft skill of how we interact and the art of coaching with athletes, I think it's just as important too as like as we think about the soft skill of how we communicate with those other realms like you're talking about. And I think that's talked about a lot of like okay, how we're gonna, like you say, we're gonna coach or communicate with different athletes based on who they are and their personalities. But I think really being to understand that and take that um, with the staff and how you need to communicate and talk to different people, different realms, different staff members is just as huge too. And yeah, like I think that's a huge part of the mentorship is learning how to operate in those social dynamics. Because I really think like athletics is so much of a like apprenticeship based model. And obviously like there's so much you need to learn from school. For me, and I think so many of the people I know, it's like working with those people, like working in my undergrad at ACU and learning, especially my mentor there, Brandon Decker, like working with him, like I learned so much more to help me get ready to coach and be, work in athletics compared to, a degree. So I think that apprenticeship of being with somebody daily and being around them and seeing those things, obviously from the programming side and the coaching side, but also just how how are they operating within the social dynamics and the communication, the soft skills, the logistics, all those things, being able to see that and be a part of that is so huge, and why I think kind of that apprenticeship and mentorship part goes so closely together and is so key in both of those.
What's your advice to like the young coach or the young clinician who's just getting started on that mentorship element? And the reason I bring it up is, even for myself personally, right? Like I feel like once you graduate, you got the degree, you got the letters or whatever, you just feel like you run the world and you can tackle
Yeah.
any problem that's thrown your way, right? Like, you just feel like nothing can stop you. And then, like 2 months later, you get into a situation, and it's like, oh, I have no idea what I'm doing now. So how do you kind of like cultivate that importance of continued learning, but continued guided learning under mentorship and connection with others that way to someone who's young? And at least in my own case, I might have been a little bit dumber than I should have been at the time. But how do you kind of like recognize that as being important at that young age?
I think it goes back to what we talked about earlier with feedback. Like I think having a mentor is like kind of an ultimate form of feedback, where especially when you're really young and first trying to learn, like you need feedback more than I mean, we always need feedback, but especially then you need lots of feedback, but also getting to see how they're operating. Because I think one of the big things too is like when you're like, let's say you're intern or whatever it is early on, like taking the mindset of like not just be there to kind of be like a passive participant, but being there to actively observe everything they're doing. And in your mind, you're trying to start form your own principles, like we talked about, like that 90-10 or whatever. But like you're trying to form your 90% of what you think when you take over of how you'll run things, right? So even if you have an incredible mentor, you're still trying to look for things that you would not do or you change or you alter, or the things, okay, I really think what they do here is valuable, and trying to form kind of your own philosophy and critically evaluate everything they're doing and other people around you are doing. I think having that mentor and that mentor's got to be somebody that also cares about you and cares about mentoring you. You can be with an incredible coach. You'd love to learn from everything, but if they aren't reciprocating that, then it's not going to be as valuable experience for you. So I think finding even it's not a big place like for me at ACU, I couldn't have asked for a better place because I also think that experience part, whereas at a smaller school, and I actually started running like fully running teams in my undergrad there, Division I school, like not many people get to do that. So I think hand in hand of being around incredible people and coaches and learning from them, but then also getting the chance to put it into action and then getting feedback on that. So like there's kind of a couple routes that could be. It's like, you're with, like for me, you're at a smaller school, maybe you're a high school, lower level division, or collegiate school, whatever it is, or whatever, private practice maybe. You get to learn from great people, but then because they're just not as they don't have as many staff there, they're more shorthanded. You actually get to get experience that maybe you're not even ready for, but you get to get thrown in the fire a little bit. And then with that, when you get to actually step into that and do that, then you can get that immediate feedback from your mentor. And that's a huge part of feedback, is kind of the speed of getting to take feedback and then re-implement. Like one thing I would advise, if you're at like let's say you're at a big school or big, whatever it is, where you're working around some great coaches, learning great stuff, but you're not actually getting to implement or like lead or kind of get real experience, like whatever realm you're in. I think you need to search and find ways to do that. Whether it's, if you're working at a big school and you're learning from all this stuff, maybe it's going at a local high school or local private setting place where you're working part-time there and you're actually getting to coach people, or even it's just whatever it is. So then you can take actually what you're learning from your mentor and that great experience, and not just learn it and kind of let it sit there and forget all about it, but you're actually taking it, put it into practice. Okay, this worked, this didn't work. You're helping, figure out your philosophies and all that. But then you can take that back to your mentor and, hey, like, I did this that you were trying to do, or whatever I learned from you and it did or did not work. Like, get feedback there. Okay, talk about it with them. Now you go back and apply it in an adjusted way into your own setting. And there's just kind of that constant feedback loop of applying, getting feedback, coming back and forth there. That I think is just huge. If you're missing out on that and you're just learning, I think you're missing out on so much of that experience part and implementing that learning.
Yeah, it's a grind, right? This is not for
Yeah.
the faint of heart. And I think sometimes people, once they, check out from the, formal education with a degree, they think, oh, life is going to be easy now. And I mean, I guess you can choose that route if you want to, but don't complain about the results that you didn't don't get from the work that you don't do, right? Like
Yeah.
if you really want to stand out, if you really want to be the best, if you really want to help as many people as you can to the best of your ability, like it is a grind and it's a commitment and it takes a lot of time and effort and
Yeah.
energy poured into it. And, I think the other piece that a lot of people bring up a lot in today's day and age in this space, I don't care if you're a PT, an AT, a strength coach, an assistant coach, whatever your title is that way, right? Like a lot of people feel that the industry is underpaid and undervalued compared to the amount of work that they do. And, that's largely true in my opinion, but that doesn't mean to stop doing the work. It means, hey, look,
Hmm.
we'll eventually get there, hopefully, fingers crossed. There's great people doing work to help correct that, but just because you're not getting paid for it doesn't mean don't do the work, right? Like a couple of years ago, we had a guy named Derek Millander on the podcast, and he's now a strength coach with the Cleveland Cavaliers. But at one point, he left a paid full-time position with benefits for an unpaid internship that eventually helped him get to where he is today. It's like sometimes
Hmm.
you actually have to take a slight step back in order to propel yourself super far forward. I think that just being willing to commit to the grind and do the work and all of the effort that you just outlined, that way is really crucial to that long-term
Yeah.
success. And I'd imagine, again, going back to, the element of talking with over 100 different coaches, I'd imagine you probably saw that same element with almost every single one of them.
Yeah.
They put a lot of time and effort and energy in. They weren't always compensated for that time and effort and energy, but it was really, really valuable. And, those, putting their time in early on, so to speak, allowed them to experience the success and the glory that they're known for now.
I think one thing I saw from so many coaches that I've seen in my own life too is like early on, you've got to chase experiences, you got to chase knowledge, and you got to chase mentorship. way more than you got to chase, a little bit more pay, I think, early on. Because, that extra pay might be great, but I think if you chase those first three things I talked about, you're chasing really developing yourself in the beginning part. It may not be in the first couple of years, but five, whatever it is, exponentially that just compounds. And ultimately you'll be way further down the line if you do chase those things as opposed to just chasing the best paycheck because that might be better in that moment. But just like anything in training or athletics life, whatever it is, like you want to make long-term decisions. And I think even if, like you're saying, even if it's going up somewhere where you're not getting paid really anything at all, but you're going to be around incredible people. You're going to get incredible experience and learn so much and develop yourself so much. You're now setting yourself to get paid way more down the line because of who you are and the experiences you've had now. And I think that's such a critical point you're making there.
Yeah, 100%. And I think the other piece too, there was a book I read when I was actually way back in school by Benjamin Hardy. He's an author that way, and the book was called
Hmm.
Slipstream Time Hacking. And at the time, I had no idea what I was about to read. I was just, doing kind of like one of them 75-day hard
Yeah.
things or whatever. Needed something to fill the void, and I was like, yeah, this is a, fairly short book. Sounds like a cool concept. Let's see what it is. And essentially, the whole concept is we think about time in terms of minutes and hours instead of experiences, right? Like, hypothetically, say the average
Yeah.
American gets to Hawaii one time in their lifetime. Well, one life equals one trip to Hawaii. Maybe you get an experience and you spend, you get to go to Hawaii 10 times. That means, hey, based on experience, you've lived tenfold the life of the average
Mm.
American. And it becomes this concept of rethinking instead of thinking about time in terms of minutes and hours and dollar signs. It's actually, hey, what about experiences that you really can't put a price on, right? Like, you can't put the price on getting to go to some of these different events and being surrounded with other people. Yeah, obviously there's a cost to get there, but like the actual knowledge and implementation and all the things that you gain from that are just absolutely intangible, I think. And I think that
Hmm.
the more you kind of buy into the concept of just valuable experiences, the more everything else falls into place that way. And I think sometimes it's just being willing to kind of take that leap and jump off a cliff and learn how to build an airplane on the way down, for lack of a better way to put it.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really cool. I'll have to look at that book. That's a really cool way to think about that. That kind of reminds me. I was trying to forget the article or whatever it was, but I remember it was from a while ago. But someone had kind of that article of like the number of times I think you'll see your parents or something like that within your lifetime, and then like once you're past 18 or something, whenever you move out, like the number of that percentage is like so small for the rest of your life. And kind of just thinking about like each one of those times and the value of that, like you're saying, the experience of that, and not just thinking about time, but how critical each one of those experiences is.
Exactly. Every single experience you get is a new opportunity, right? And every single
Yep.
person you meet can provide just so much knowledge and insight. I'm always amazed by how much I actually learn from just talking to people or kind of diving into the work that they're doing that way. And
Hmm.
obviously, you did that for an extended period of time that way. What have kind of been the major or biggest takeaways or biggest things that you've learned from this entire deep dive process into writing and developing your own book and talking with over 100 different coaches that way?
With so many of those coaches in the book that are at the highest level of what they're doing, I think, as we've talked about principles and stuff throughout, our conversation today, it's like there's so many coaches that are at the top of what they're doing, but they might look at, right, 'cause for the book I asked these 12 questions to everybody. They're kind of the same questions. Some of them might have completely different perspectives or opinions on how to answer that question, but they're both at the top of what they're doing, but doing it a different way. So I think one of those things is like there's not just one set path, obviously, to become a high level person with working within athletics or sports. But I think what it comes down to with Sealam is the principles that they are doing it by and that they're grounded in. And it's like we talk about not switching all this stuff, like they're grounded in their principles of how they've gotten there. I think one other thing, and one of the questions I have is overcoming burnout, struggle, overwhelm, right? A lot of coaches, or people within athletics that you talk about, it's a grind, right? I was getting paid the most, lots and lots of hours. A lot of us deal with that type, those things. And I think what's really interesting is how many, like, a lot of times we look at people at the very top and it's like, man, like, I want to be there. Like, they're killing it. They've got it so good of where they are now. They're so good at what they're doing. They're probably getting so much money, whatever. Like, everything's great in their career and life. But then answering these questions and getting a response, like, so many of them have dealt with those things throughout their career, or dealing with those things, even when they've been at the top, even when they've won national, whatever it is. And I think that vulnerability and authenticity from them was really, really cool and really powerful. That was probably some of the most powerful stuff for me, is reading their stories and hearing about some of them, their darkest moments as people and coaches, or people in athletics, whatever it is. And I just think it's powerful, because I think a lot of times when we might get into that, when we're really going through it in our own career or life, we feel like, okay, maybe I can't talk to other people about it, or like some level of like shame and ego, like, I don't want people to know I'm feeling like this, or that I'm the only one feeling like this and shouldn't be feeling like this. But I think just seeing it like, hey, all these people at the highest levels, they have felt those things too, and they've been really real and open about those things. And I think it creates a form of like shared, feeling or experience there, that helps people feel like, okay, even if you are that very young coach and you're already feeling that's like, hey, like I'm not the only one, and it's like, it's not necessarily like wrong or shameful to feel like this. And then here's some ways that they actually went through that, and principles or systems they've applied into their life of how they combat that, or how they think about those things. So I think that aspect was really has been really cool to see, and one of the most impactful things of the book.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, everyone's going to face obstacles and challenges and
Yeah.
trials, right? And unfortunately, you can't stop the waves that life throws at you, but you can certainly learn how to surf them. The
Yep.
more you kind of like dive into that element, and to the point that we made before about mentorship and connection, like you said, everyone is going to face those times, but the more you kind of lean into the support of others around you who maybe have been there before in a similar situation, and yeah, it was rough, but again, this is how they got through it, right? And I think the more you kind of develop that own internal support group or support network for yourself, but also just take the time to learn and understand and appreciate what other people have gone through. And this even applies to your athletes nonetheless, too, right? Because athletes don't always have good days, and there's times when things are really tough and challenging for them, right? They're people too. So I think the more that you kind of humanize that whole concept of coaching, the more like
Hmm.
again, I keep using the term effective, but really just the better all the pieces fall into place, really.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like you talk about kind of thinking about with the athletes, like, one of the other questions was about injuries, and like, okay, if one of the athletes you're working with has an injury, like, what's your mindset in that moment and then within like the following week or period of time? And I think kind of echo what you're saying. It's like, I think the way that most people can relate best to those athletes is when you've had that injury yourself, right? If you've gone through that long-term rehab yourself, you can have those conversations where you relate to the athlete in that, and about kind of the ups and downs of that, right? Because there's always going to be ups and downs during that process. I think, one of the things a couple of people talked about when they've, had some of those really big, whether it's as a coach, like an Achilles, whatever it is, they talked about, man, like, in my head, like, I'm thinking like, man, my life's over. Like, I've got this, like, the whole world's crashing down. And okay, let's think about then as our athlete's perspective. This is how they pay for their college, or this is how, like, they're providing for their family as a professional athlete, or whatever it is. Like, even more so, it's impacting their career and their life right now. And as a coach, like, I can still coach whatever if we have an injury, but like, we feel this way mentally when we get an injury. So I think having those injuries in a way like creates, okay, now let's think about how our athletes are feeling, and can create even more of a level of understanding and ability to approach that athlete and understand kind of where their head might be and how we might need to help them and through that time. So I think that kind of applies pretty similarly to kind of that other aspect we're talking about with the overcoming burnout, struggle, and overwhelm.
Yeah, 100%, 100%, man. And I mean, I feel like we could probably talk about this space, sports performance coaching, for pretty much all day. There's so much to unpack, and there's
Yeah.
so much that goes into this. And I feel like we're really just scratching the surface that way. Is there anything that we missed or anything else that you really wanted to bring up in relation to our conversation today?
Kind of encapsulate a lot of what we talked about is just understanding and spending the time to develop your principles and philosophies and systems as a coach, and both within the specific realm you're in, but also in terms of like the X's and O's, the technical ability, but then also in terms of whatever organization or realm or kind of space you're in of how you're operating as a whole within that organization and the people around you. Because I think it's easy, you know, it's easy to kind of get caught up in just right. Like we talked about, it's a grind. It's easy to get caught up in doing the job, doing whatever you're in, and not taking the time to actually sit down and reflect and get feedback and see what's working, what's not, both in technical, but also who you are as a coach. So actually creating space for that and getting in with your thoughts a little bit. It's easy to never actually sit with your own thoughts anymore with social media and everything else, but being really intentional with creating that space. And I think it goes back to what we're saying with jobs, where we're thinking about long-term decisions instead of kind of those short-term ones, creating long-term impact for your career through creating those spaces where you might not see this huge change from, sitting down for an hour one time, but creating consistent, intentional space there to actually really think and develop like who you're going to be as a professional long term and how you operate is just huge. And like for me, is like when I transitioned to leave collegiate athletics and start my own business, like I hired a coach, and and I think that's huge. And even part of it's like having that 1 hour a week where we're intentionally thinking about asking questions and I'm pondering things, but I'm also preparing for that and spending time with my own thoughts and both in the short term and long term decisions and principles of how I want to create this business and like who I want to be as a person and a coach in that. I think that time was absolutely huge for me, and I think it's easy to never do that, and I get caught up in never doing that also when that's not carved out for me. But I think really sitting down and carving out that space and setting that into your schedule, what you're going to do, again, exponentially going to compound down the line. May not see it short term, but down the line of just who you are as a person and professional is just huge.
Completely agree, man. You said that really, really well. And
Thank you.
obviously, I know that you are a phenomenal resource for people who want to learn more. Obviously, you wrote the book, which is also an incredible resource. Where can people find out more about you and the book and all that sort of thing at?
The best the place where I've most stuff probably Instagram at John Bloom 30. I've got if you want to reach out to me in there, respond. And then I'm also on my website, johnbloomcoaching.com, kind of got information about all aspects of the business, but then specifically the book too, Strength in Numbers there. If you want more information on that book and kind of who's in it, what's it about, kind of all that information's on there. And then the book also, you can get that on Amazon there for Strength in Numbers. But really, reach out to me through Instagram or, you can email me. I'm at info at johnbloomcoaching.com and I'll get back to you. Love to, anybody that wants to reach out, more than happy to talk about any aspect of kind of what you're doing or what you want to talk about.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. We'll link to all that in the description below too. That way, if you didn't quite catch that, you can just click there and check out everything that John is up to. Dude, this was awesome. I really appreciate your time and everything you're doing.
Man, I'm grateful to have this conversation with you. I think it was really cool, kind of what we got into.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Braun Performance and Rehab Podcast. Be sure to give a follow on Instagram if you don't already. You can find me at Braun_PR. Also, if you like the podcast, please share it with someone that you think could benefit from listening to the episodes that I put out. And if you wouldn't mind, leave a 5-star review on your favorite platform.